Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Back with a forecast update on our severe weather event that is set to take place tomorrow, Monday, January 8th into Tuesday, January 9th. The SPC has now increased the severe weather probabilities for areas from southeast Louisiana into southern Mississippi and Alabama into the western Florida Panhandle to an enhanced risk, level 3 out of 5 in the orange area you see there, including places like New Orleans, Gulfport, Biloxi, Mobile, over toward Pensacola under the gun for the greatest threat for severe weather. As confidence has increased in more significant severe weather for this area, especially Monday night into Tuesday morning, which is when the severe threat should be maximized within this setup. There is also a slight risk that has been extended to the southeast Texas area and surrounding that enhanced risk area all the way through the Florida Panhandle. Places like Houston, Galveston, Beaumont, Lake Charles, and over to the east under the gun for a level 2 out of 5 slight risk there. We also have seen an extending of the marginal risk up toward the Red River, including places like Dallas-Fort Worth, up toward the Wichita Falls area. Marginal severe threat there tomorrow morning, Monday morning especially, as we will get storm initiation early on, but it should remain very elevated, and the severe threat will maintain in an isolated capacity until the afternoon hours roll around. We'll talk about that here in just a second, but again, severe threat has increased now by the SPC on their latest outlook, level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk for the area in orange. The reason is for an increase in confidence in a significant tornado threat that will develop Monday night into Tuesday morning in the yellow hatched area there from southern Louisiana eastward through the western Florida Panhandle. Again, places like New Orleans, Gulfport, Biloxi, Mobile, Pensacola under the gun for a significant tornado threat for a few strong tornadoes embedded within the line and possibly from prefrontal discrete supercells. We'll talk about that again in just a minute, but the tornado threat has increased here for these areas, and the tornado threat has also increased farther to the west back into southeast Texas. It was just a 2% area there in the previous outlook that has now been increased to a 5% area for the areas in brown. Again, Houston, Galveston, over toward Beaumont and Lake Charles under the gun for a severe threat, a tornado threat there. Also, a damaging wind threat has been increased for these areas. The red hatched area, potential for some pretty significant wind gusts in excess of 60, 70 miles an hour there as the line moves through tomorrow evening into the overnight hours Tuesday morning. Large hail threat is there as well, but that will be kind of on the back burner, I think. Greatest hail threat will be from in the southeast Texas vicinity. But again, the tornado and damaging wind threats are going to be the most significant threats with this setup. So let's go ahead and dive into some current data that we're seeing. We'll look at our SPC mesoanalysis, starting off with our 500 millibar map. And this is our trough. Back in here, you can see this trough digging down into the desert southwest this morning. As I'm recording this about 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, as I'm in Arizona right now. This is where our trough is located, right over the desert southwest. We're seeing some wind and rain here outside in the Phoenix area right now due to this trough. And that trough will continue to dig down and amplify, ejecting into the southern plains tomorrow. And that will be our main synoptic forcing mechanism for severe weather in this setup tomorrow. If we go down to 850 millibars, we expect to see, as this strong upper level flow starting to traverse the Rockies, we should expect to start seeing some at least broad cyclogenesis here, and that's exactly what we've seen. Broad low level cyclone here centered across the Rockies with a bit of a low level jet across the southern high plains here from southern Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, down into western Texas. 40 to 45 knot low-level jet there this morning, and that should increase through the day as we continue to get Lee cyclogenesis as the upper-level system ejects across the Rockies. Broad surface low has started to develop in this area as well, strengthening winds across the plains, the southern and central high plains today. So could see some gusty pressure gradient winds out there, but that surface low will continue to consolidate, especially out here across the eastern New Mexico, western Texas corridor going into tonight, into tomorrow morning, and that is going to be our main surface low associated with this event. All right, let's go ahead and look at some surface data. And because we've had a little bit of a cold frontal intrusion the past few days with our initial wave, had a marginal severe threat along the coast, the Gulf Coast into Florida. The last couple of days had that tornado in Fort Lauderdale yesterday afternoon. That was associated with our initial wave that has moved through, and that was associated with a cold front, a surface low and cold front that has swept some of that moisture out into the Gulf. We had 50s and 60s dew points here across southeast Texas the past few days. That is not the case now. That cold front has swept those dew points out into the Gulf. And as a result, that's going to modulate how far north the overall severe threat is going to go. Because we've seen, for tomorrow's event, because we've seen a little bit of that sweeping of the dew points out into the Gulf, we won't be able to get that moisture as far north as we would be if the dew points were situated there along the Gulf Coast at this point. Only seeing 30s and 40s dew points across the southern plains at this point, and that is because we've seen that sweeping of that moisture out into the Gulf. And so as we start to get that surface low to develop across eastern New Mexico, western Texas, going into tonight and tomorrow morning, we'll start to see those winds really flip around to southeasterly and start to strengthen and pull that moisture northward rapidly starting tomorrow morning. And that is going to be the main impetus to get that warm sector inland, and that will modulate our severe threat going into tomorrow. So let's take a look now at some model data. We'll take a look at the 12Z NAM, so the morning run of the NAM model from this morning. We are just going to look at the NAM model for the most part in this video, just for time's sake, because we already did our kind of multi-model analysis in our most recent video. We will take a look at the GFS just to show you how things will progress into Tuesday. Again, we have a slight risk for Tuesday. Let me pull that up real quick for you. Slight risk now has been issued for our day 3 outlook from southeast Alabama, Georgia, Florida, northeastward along the eastern seaboard into the Carolinas. Slight risk level 2 out of 5 for Tuesday, as the threat will continue eastward as we go into the day Tuesday. But we're going to focus on Monday in this video, then we'll touch on Tuesday at the end. Because there are some little bit of model discrepancy that has crept back in among the models for the positioning of the features on Tuesday. So we're going to focus on Monday, and I think the best course of action at this point is to take keep our focus on the Monday event, tomorrow's event, January 8th, and then as we go forward the next day or so, we'll know a little bit more, especially after we see how the event progresses tomorrow. That will give us a little bit better clue as to what's going to happen on Tuesday. So let's focus on Monday for now, and then we'll go into Tuesday. Perhaps be back with an additional video tomorrow, as well as Tuesday morning for the Tuesday portion of the event. So for now, we'll just look at the Monday portion. We'll look at the 12Z NAM. This is our 500 millibar map. You can see that trough digging down into the southwest this morning. Again, that will continue to do so, continue to amplify and take on a fairly neutral tilt as we go into the afternoon tomorrow. This is at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow. Very wound up trough, closed contour there across the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. So this is a really tightly wound trough, very strong flow rounding the base of this trough, in excess of 100 knots of flow rounding the base of this trough. You can see shaded in the purples there. So very intense flow associated with this upper level system. And as a result, we're going to see very strong kinematics, or very strong wind fields associated with this event overspread this region. That's why the significant tornado threat has increased going into tomorrow evening into the overnight hours Tuesday morning. So very potent trough here. Again, as this trough continues to traverse the Rockies and that strong belt of flow traverses the Rockies, we're going to see low-level cyclogenesis. Let's go ahead and go right to 850 millibars, go down to about 1 kilometer off the surface. So you'll see that just broad cyclogenesis start to occur today, as we already saw on our SPC mesoanalysis data. Decent plume of low-level jet here going into the afternoon today, 30, 40, even 50 knots there up across Oklahoma and Kansas. That will continue to strengthen going into the evening hours as that low-level cyclone starts to intensify. So tomorrow morning, we should see very strong low-level flow. You can even see some 80-knot barbs there across that Red River region. That is going to help really start pulling that low-level moisture northward into the region. And that is going to compensate at least somewhat for the prior cold frontal intrusion sweeping those better dew points into the Gulf. This strong low-level jet is going to act like a fire hose, really pumping that low-level moisture northward. And so we're going to get at least some intrusion, some northward advance of the warm sector into southern and eastern Texas tomorrow for our at least the first portion of the event. So very strong low-level flow associated with this cyclone will continue to strengthen going into the evening hours. That is pretty impressive there. You see some blues. That is low-level winds in excess of 90 knots. That is incredibly strong low-level flow that will really start help to pull that moisture northward. We do have a fly in the ointment. We'll talk about that in a second, but that low-level flow is very, very strong, and as such, we'll see intense low-level shear overspread this region, and that is why we're going to see a significant tornado and damaging wind threat develop along the Gulf Coast. Going down to the surface, we'll take a look at our surface low. Let me zoom in here to our southern plains sector. So again, surface cyclogenesis will take place starting this evening across eastern New Mexico and really intensify going into tomorrow morning. You see that surface low. This is at 3 a.m. Central Standard Time. Surface low starting to develop across the northeast New Mexico-Texas border, and that will continue to move off to the east during the day. So that is our first low-level center, or surface cyclone center we'll see across the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles. We're also expecting to see at least weak cyclogenesis across east central Texas at some point during the late morning to early afternoon hours tomorrow. That's why we talked about in the earlier video we put out on this event. We're going to see a broad and deep surface low, but it's going to be somewhat disorganized. We're going to see a couple of different centers in here. The main center is going to be up here off to the northwest across the panhandles. Then we're going to see a secondary center, at least weak cyclogenesis, weak low center develop across east central Texas. You see this little trough in the surface pressure contours. That is indicative of at least slightly more intense low pressure developing in that area. And so that could foster a couple of things. Number one, that could again allow those low-level winds to really strengthen and back out of the southeast to pull that moisture northward into East Texas for our initial round of severe storms with this event. And number two, that could allow low-level shear to increase across this area, and that will allow for an increase in the tornado threat and damaging wind threat across East Texas. Again, it's a little bit conditional in this area whether or not we'll see a robust severe threat develop. And that is because we will see, given strong low-level warm advection, we could see a lot of clouds and showers here across East Texas initially, going into the late morning, early afternoon hours tomorrow. And that could inhibit the instability a little bit. You can see surface temperatures here on the NAM only up into the 60s across the warm sector, across the southeast Texas coast, starting to creep into the low 70s there. But again, the NAM has a little bit of a cold bias often. So let's look at the GFS surface temperatures here, just for a quick comparison at what we might see tomorrow. So again, we're looking on the NAM at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow, 21Z. So let's go to 21Z here, and you do see that the GFS is predicting pretty much the same, upper 50s, low 60s, into even slightly into the low 70s there across the Houston-Galveston area along the Texas coast. So that is going to be critical in whether or not we'll see surface-based development out here across East Texas. We will see, given strong forcing aloft, I'll go back here to the NAM just to show you, strong forcing aloft will start to overspread the northwest Texas region by early Monday morning. And as a result, along the cold front, which will stretch up in here, up to the northern surface low, we'll start to see convective development early on along the cold front here across northwest Texas, stretching down into west central Texas. The severe threat will remain very limited. That's why the SPC has drawn that marginal risk a little bit farther to the northwest there, up to the Red River area, for maybe some isolated strong wind gusts with that activity. But most of that will remain sub-severe. But the main point is that storms will form fairly early here across northwest Texas as that cold front develops, that surface low and cold front develop, and as the forcing starts to overspread the region. But again, that will remain very much isolated in nature as far as the severe threat goes. The severe threat will increase going into the afternoon as that squall line moves off to the east. And we see perhaps additional convective development ahead of that line into East Texas. Forcing overspreads the region by mid to late afternoon here. And that will allow storm formation, the continuation of that initial line, and the possibility of development ahead of that line. But the question is whether or not that will be surface-based development. Again, the surface temperatures are a little bit on the low side. If we see lots of cloud cover, lots of showers here across east and southeast Texas during the morning into the early afternoon, that is going to keep those surface temperatures down and allow those storms to remain elevated as they move into East Texas. That will lower the overall tornado and damaging wind threat and the severe threat as a whole if that scenario takes place. If we get surface temperatures in the low to mid 70s even across this area, that will increase the severe threat, allow those storms to become surface-based, and the overall tornado threat and damaging wind threat, and perhaps a large hail threat as well, will increase. Again, the large hail threat and tornado threat may be greatest with convection ahead of that main line, whereas damaging winds along that squall line will be the main threat. So that is one possible fly in the ointment with the severe threat for the initial round of storms here in East Texas to southwest Louisiana during the afternoon and early evening hours. So let's take a look at our moisture here on the NAM. So again, our dew points, those blue colors almost off the screen here into the central Gulf. That is our more robust moisture. You can see it's been pushed off into the Gulf. If we go back a couple of model runs here to just yesterday morning, you'll see, all right, let's go 2 days prior when we did our last video. So you can see just 2 days ago, so this was just a couple of days ago, the morning 12Z run of the NAM on January 5th, today's January 7th, those dew points were located just along or right off the southeast Texas coast. But as we went forward in time, the cold front really shunted those dew points out into the Gulf, pushed those away, and as a result, we've seen a little bit of drying here across the southern plains as that cold front moved through. So those dew points have been swept out into the Gulf. And again, that's going to modulate how far north our severe threat is going to be able to go. If we did not have that initial cold frontal intrusion, those 60s and 70s dew points would still be right here. We'd be really able to pull that moisture northward, and we'd be seeing a more robust severe threat farther north with this setup. But that will be compensated a little bit by the very strong low-level flow we're expecting to see with this event. So here we are back with our 12Z NAM from this morning. You'll see as we go into the evening hours tonight, that moisture starts to really get pulled northwestward into the southern Texas coastal area. And then we'll start to see intrusion of those higher dew points into the morning hours as that surface low and cold front develop tomorrow morning. At least a somewhat of a decent inland advance of the warm sector here. Warm front would be located here. Here would be our cold front associated with the main surface low up here in the Oklahoma vicinity. Again, secondary surface cyclogenesis expected here across east central Texas, so somewhat of a surface low in here. Warm front will be the northern extent of the severe threat with this activity. So again, activity will be ongoing along the cold front here tomorrow morning. That will push off to the east. Again, a very marginal, isolated severe threat with that activity. And we will see, again, strong warm advection could foster some additional development ahead of the line in the open warm sector. We do have enough real estate to foster enough area for severe storms to develop out ahead of the main line, but again, that's all going to depend on the low-level temperatures. If we can get surface temperatures up into the low to mid-70s, then we'll see a surface-based supercell threat develop, both with storms in the line and ahead of the line, and that will increase the severe threat. The SPC did mention in their outlook possibly increasing severe probabilities even further out here if confidence in higher low-level temperatures increases. But for now, we are seeing that as being a possible fly in the ointment with this activity. So that's going to be our first round of storms here. Storms initially in the morning along the cold front well back to the northwest in northwest Texas. That will move off to the east, marginal severe threat there. And then by afternoon, again, this is 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, that warm sector will make its way inland as the squall line interacts with that more robust low-level moisture and instability. We will see an uptick probably in in the intensity of the storms in that line, and perhaps an uptick in severe potential, mostly a damaging wind threat along that line. But again, we'll have to look for possibility for discrete supercells ahead of that line as the warm sector makes its way inland. So let's take a sounding here. We'll take one here just from the Houston-Galveston area. That will be indicative of the environment over the warm sector here, according to the NAM. That is a pretty impressive environment here. I do tend to think that the instability is being overdone here on the NAM, over 2,300 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE. I think that is a little bit on the high side. Because we'll have quite a bit of cloud cover and showers early in the morning, I do think that is going to be quite a bit overdone. Perhaps on the higher end, we might see something like 1,500 joules per kilogram, but something more in the 1,000 joules per kilogram range is probably more accurate here. So I don't think that the NAM is really all that accurate with the instability here, but nonetheless, we will have adequate instability for robust updrafts and a severe threat here. And that hodograph is pretty impressive. Decent low-level curvature there, strong veering of the low-level winds with height, over 400 meters squared per second squared of effective storm relative helicity. That is pretty strong low-level shear. So that is why it's more of a conditional tornado and perhaps conditional strong tornado threat here across southeast Texas into southwest Louisiana tomorrow afternoon into early evening. As if this kind of a setup, this kind of thermodynamic environment verifies, we will see a significant tornado threat develop with the storms both along the line, embedded spin-ups within the line, and again, perhaps discrete development out ahead of the line would favor a strong tornado and damaging wind risk, along with a large hail risk initially in the early portion of the convective life cycle. But this is a pretty impressive looking profile. Again, this is on the very, very high end of the guidance, so don't take this at face value. But if this does verify, this would be a ceiling type scenario where we'd see robust instability, robust low-level instability. We can see over 100, almost 130 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer cape, meaning intense low-level updrafts, intense stretching of the low-level spin, low-level shear into the vertical, and that would create a tornado threat, perhaps significant tornado threat. But again, at this point, it is conditional across southeast Texas into southwest Louisiana. All right, and then that warm sector will move off to the east into the overnight hours, and that is where some of the conditionality has been with the last couple of outlooks, and why the SPC had not upgraded until this particular outlook. One of the bugaboos potentially in this forecast was the potential for lots of convection over the Gulf during the day on Monday, tomorrow. So this is the NAM, and this is convective precipitation. So we're not looking at individual cells in here. We're just looking at an overall signal for convection in that you'll see in the shaded areas here. So you see during the morning and early afternoon hours, we see quite a bit of convective development out over the Gulf of Mexico and along the coastal areas here. That has been a problem with this forecast, and a thing that has made this forecast difficult is that this convection out over the Gulf would be likely to decrease the ability for that strong low-level moisture to advect very far inland, because those storms out over the Gulf would be feasting off that moisture, so to speak, and therefore that juicy low-level environment would be tainted a little bit as it moved its way onshore, and therefore we wouldn't be able to get robust low-level moisture that far inland. But that has those concerns have kind of backed off a little bit, as we saw very strong low-level wind fields associated with this low-level cyclone here that will be able to really advect that moisture in spite of that convection over the Gulf quite a bit inland across the Gulf Coast states. So if we go back to our moisture here, let me go back to our surface dew points. So again, you see during the day, that warm sector will remain confined to southeast Texas, southwest Louisiana. Not much inland advance over southeast Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, into the Florida Panhandle. But as we go into the overnight hours, as the trough shifts its way east, here's that 500 millibar trough, that strong upper level flow, strengthening with time, taking on a more neutral to slightly negative tilt with time that will overspread the region and allow for synoptic scale forcing for ascent for a strongly forced squall line along the cold front and potential discrete development ahead of the line. But that warm sector will make its way inland into the late evening overnight hours with this event. You see by 3Z, this is at 9 p.m. Central Time, that warm sector pretty much encompassing all of southern Louisiana, and that will foster a significant severe weather threat there. And that warm sector will continue to move off to the east, going into the overnight hours, early morning hours into Tuesday, moving east across southern Mississippi and Alabama into the western Florida Panhandle. So again, you can see that first of all, you can see that the storm mode along the front will be very much linear. You see that northeast to southwest slanted cold front, very progressive nature to the cold front, very fast moving cold front as that strong synoptic forcing takes over. That, coupled with shear vectors oriented very much parallel to the initiating boundary, that will foster a very quick transition to a linear mode and a strongly forced squall line here moving east into the late evening overnight hours Monday into Tuesday morning. Here's our squall line here. This is at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, and our shear vectors here oriented very much almost purely parallel to that initiating boundary, which is the cold front. So a very, very quick transition to a squall line along the cold front is expected to take place, but given the strong kinematics in place, that will still favor a significant damaging wind and significant tornado threat with embedded spin-ups within the squall line. So that warm sector will continue to move east. Now let's look at the potential for discrete supercells out ahead of the line in this warm sector. Now, as we saw the warm sector, there is enough real estate for discrete supercells ahead of the line. Here's the cold front. There is enough real estate ahead for a discrete supercell threat out ahead of the cold front. It does kind of get pinched off going into the morning hours on Tuesday. So we'll have to see how that shapes up. But let's take a look at if we see any little surface, pressure tongues out in the open warm sector. So here we are at 9 p.m. Here's our secondary surface low center, cold front situated back in here. And we might see a little bit of a pressure kink in the pressure contours there, perhaps a little bit of a confluence band, maybe a slight confluence band in here across southern Louisiana. That would foster, again, slightly less forcing, slightly less intense forcing along that confluence band, given more subtle convergence along it. And that would foster a more discrete mode, given strong in that warm advection regime out ahead of the cold front. So we'll have to watch that for sure, as we weren't really able to tell whether or not we'd see discrete development in the past few model runs. But now that we have some data here closer to the event, we do see maybe a potential pressure kink in the pressure contours there, indicating a confluence band in the open warm sector. And do we see any low-level frontal zones here, low-level confluence bands, 850 millibars, perhaps a little bit of confluence here out across southern Louisiana. So that we'll have to watch very, very closely. If we can get discrete supercells out ahead of the line, that will foster the greatest threat for significant tornadoes. The low-level flow here, as you'll see as I pull up a sounding here, I'm going to pull it up from southeast Louisiana, eastern edge of the warm sector, well out ahead of the cold front, and the squall line ahead of the cold front. This type of environment is pretty eye-opening as far as significant tornadoes go. So adequate instability here, 1,500 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE. Again, this might be a little bit on the higher side of the guidance, but still adequate instability for robust updrafts. Very deep, moist layer there extending up above 700 millibars, very saturated low levels. That could be a problem for some setups in the southeast. That doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. I've seen plenty of setups have very weaker lapse rates in the low levels, very saturated low level profiles, but still produce significant tornadoes. So not going to look too much into that. The overall idea is that we should have a robust enough instability for a robust severe threat here in this area. But look at that hodograph. That hodograph is absolutely impressive. Super intense veering of the low-level winds with height. Those low-level winds both veer in direction with height and strengthen pretty considerably from the surface at about 20 knots at the surface to here at 850 millibars, 60 to 70 knots there. So that is a 50 knot increase in just a kilometer's worth of distance above the surface. That is going to lead to very, very, very intense low-level shear, strong curvature in the low levels of the hodograph. So that is going to foster, number one, a lot of a high potential for strong embedded circulations within the line. Usually within a squall line, we talk about very brief, weak tornadic spin-ups, kinks in the line. That is not the case. Because we have so much low-level shear, we will have the ability for those kinks within the line to last a little bit longer and also be a little bit stronger, perhaps edging into that significant tornado range. And again, also, if we can get discrete supercells out ahead of this line, that is going to be very, very favorable. This environment will be very favorable for significant tornadoes out ahead in those discrete supercells. But again, that's a little bit conditional. We will certainly have a strongly forced squall line here, and that will have the potential for significant damaging winds transferred down to the surface, given super strong flow there in the low levels. That will be transferred down to the surface via downdrafts. So significant damaging winds, 70 plus mile an hour winds at the surface possibly, but also the potential for significant tornadoes within the squall line. And that discrete development out ahead of the squall line is a little bit conditional at this point, but if that happens, certainly a damaging wind and strong tornado threat there. Even into the morning hours tomorrow morning, you'll see that warm sector continues off to the east. We'll take a sounding there at kind of the Pensacola area going into tomorrow morning. This is at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time, 7 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. Much of the same. Robust enough instability, and very strong, largely clockwise curved hodographs there in the low levels. Hodographs literally off the charts here, given such strong low-level flow. That is super, super impressive how this low-level cyclone is going to intensify, and that low-level wind field will strengthen pretty substantially going into the overnight hours tomorrow. So that will foster, again, a continuation of the threat into Tuesday morning along the squall line and any potential discrete supercells that may make their way onshore here across the Florida Panhandle Tuesday morning, excuse me. So let's take a look at at why Tuesday. We're still a little bit up in the air with Tuesday. I'm going to zoom back out here, and I'm going to go back to our 500 millibar map on the NAM, and we'll take a look at the GFS here. Zoom back out on the GFS. Look at the 500 millibar map. So the reason that Tuesday is a little bit up in the air at this point is because the overall progression among the models, especially between the NAM and the GFS, is a little bit different with the overall progression of these features. So here's our 500 millibar trough on the, this is the 12Z NAM from this morning. So you see as we go into Tuesday, here we are at 12Z Tuesday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time Tuesday. The center of our trough is up here across Missouri. Here in the GFS, 12Z Tuesday, center of the trough is a little bit farther south across northwest Arkansas. So that is going to be a little bit of a difference in where our overall features are going to set up. We should expect to see some differences in the surface low as well for Tuesday morning. So here's the GFS, and here is the NAM. So 12Z Tuesday, main surface low centered up here in the kind of St. Louis vicinity, if you will. Cold front down in here. Secondary surface low development over there, moving off to the east across Mississippi and Louisiana. Or Mississippi and Alabama, excuse me. Here we are on the GFS. The surface low, main surface low, much farther to the south, a little bit farther to the south as well with our overall features with the secondary surface low in the Gulf Coast states. So that's going to modulate where the overall setup, the overall best environment for severe storms is going to set up Tuesday. If we look at the NAM, I'll zoom in here to our southeast sector for this. The NAM has a pretty decent warm sector making its way up farther to the north across the Carolinas by Tuesday afternoon. This is at 4 p.m. Eastern Time Tuesday afternoon. Warm sector encompassing much of the Carolinas, main cold front here. So lots of warm, moist air in the low levels therefore, as that will be our warm sector for Tuesday. Let's zoom into the GFS here, and we'll look in our southeast sector. So here we are, 4 p.m. Central Time. The GFS, again, much less robust, much more progressive here. Warm sector almost offshore by 21Z, a little bit farther to the south as well. So that is going to have implications on where the severe threat sets up. We are seeing a little bit more model discrepancy here, unusually high model discrepancy for this close to an event for Tuesday. So it's going to depend on how Monday plays out. And we'll know a little bit more tomorrow, by tomorrow afternoon and evening, how things will go on Tuesday. But again, what is for sure is the severe threat should maintain itself through Monday night into Tuesday morning with, at a minimum, the storms, the squall line along the cold front. That will foster, again, a significant tornado and significant damaging wind threat with embedded circulations and stronger updrafts within the squall line. Discrete development out ahead of that line is a little bit in question for Tuesday morning, but that could be a player as we go into day 3 Tuesday with this event. But again, Tuesday a little bit up in the air at this point. We're just going to have to wait and see how Monday goes before we can make determinations on Tuesday. So best course of action for Tuesday, if you are in any of these areas, any of the green and yellow areas here for Tuesday, places like Dothan, Tallahassee, Savannah, Charleston, Wilmington, North Carolina, down even to Orlando, Melbourne, Tampa, Florida. Definitely take precautions as if this was as the higher end ceiling event was going to take place in your area, which would be a significant tornado and damaging wind threat going into Tuesday morning through the afternoon for these areas. But again, we're not sure. These lines are probably going to change a bit through the next couple of days leading up to the event. So we'll just have to wait and see how tomorrow goes before we can make determinations on who is going to be in and who is out, and the overall hazards that we might see on Tuesday. So for Monday, back to Monday, let's take a look at some convective allowing model data. So again, we use these cams often. These don't do a great job of highlighting what is exactly going to happen with these events farther than a few hours out from the actual event. So take this with a grain of salt, but at least these will give us an idea of what the radar might look like going into tomorrow for tomorrow's event. So here we are, 12Z HRRR run. So you see about 6 to 7Z here. We start to see initial development, strongly forced, very thin looking development there along the cold front as that upper level trough moves in and the cold front and surface low develop there across the southern Texas panhandle into northwest Texas. That is going to be our initial convection with this event. It will be very early in the morning. This is just after midnight, it looks like, here going into the morning hours tomorrow. Early morning commute in places like Wichita Falls, going over toward Dallas-Fort Worth. Maybe a little bit on the dicey side tomorrow as that squall line moves east. This will be, again, only marginally severe, some isolated instances of some severe wind gusts within that line, but overall, this line should remain sub-severe, as it will not be interacting with that warm sector that will be making its way inland across much of East Texas until the afternoon hours. So here we go into the afternoon. We start to see a lot of these little beans out ahead of the main line. So our main line back in here, and you see a bunch of these little beans out ahead of the line. This is at about noon Central Standard Time. That warm sector will have made its way inland here across southeast Texas. So we'll have to watch again. It's going to be conditional upon whether or not we can get full destabilization in this area. This squall line will kind of peter out here across East Texas, it looks like on this particular model, with some potential for discrete development out ahead of the line. These will have a tornado and damaging wind threat, perhaps even a conditional strong tornado threat, but that will all depend on whether or not we can get temperatures in the low to mid 70s across this area. And we'll know more about that tomorrow as we go into the morning hours tomorrow. So Southeast Texas, places like Houston, Galveston, I know the college football championship is tomorrow night. Definitely should be on the lookout and prepare as if we were going to see significant severe weather there. But it is, again, conditional on whether or not we'll see full destabilization in these areas, Southeast Texas, Southwest Louisiana. So then we'll see our main squall line develop along the cold front going into the overnight hours. Very strongly forced squall line here as we saw, very strong wind fields, strong synoptic scale forcing for ascent, progressive at low level features, including the cold front moving quickly off to the east, forcing a full-on squall line here that will have a robust tornado and damaging wind threat. I'm going to shift sectors here to the southeast sector so we can see a little bit of a progression into the overnight hours on Monday. So here is our squall line there, and you see a bunch of development here out across the southern Louisiana corridor here, starting by Monday afternoon, early evening. Those will have the greatest potential for a significant tornado and damaging wind threat, especially a significant tornado threat given the super strong low-level shear. So we'll have to watch that. You can see a bunch of supercells making their way onshore. That could, again, will have the greatest significant severe threat there, but also significant severe expected along the squall line back to the west. Squall line marches off to the east going into Tuesday morning. All right, let's take a look at another model here, WRF ARW model. I'll go back to our Southern Plains sector here. So once again, early development just after midnight, very early morning hours tomorrow across northwest Texas. Only isolated severe there. This model does develop a few supercells out here across the open warm sector in East Texas by as early as late morning, and that continues into the late afternoon and evening hours. We'll see if that stuff can become surface-based or not. But then the main squall line forms overnight going into southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama. I'll shift sectors here. Just give me a minute. And here is our squall line with a lot of stuff out ahead of the line making their way onshore here, especially across the Florida Panhandle into Tuesday morning. We'll have to watch that for sure, as we've said. But embedded strong circulations, strong tornadoes, and damaging winds along that squall line. So very similar look to the overall setup on progression of the event on that ARW model. One last model here, NSSL WRF model. I'll go back to our Southern Plains sector. And you'll see much of the same here. Initial development out in northwest Texas in the early morning hours this Monday morning. Additional development out here in southeast Texas. Whether or not it becomes surface-based, again, is in question. And then very strongly forced squall line going into southeast Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, overnight hours into Tuesday morning, when the severe threat will maximize. And then we will see, and you see a bunch of this stuff out here well out ahead of the main squall line across southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, Alabama, western Florida Panhandle. That is going to be the greatest threat for significant tornadoes there. So most of the models here look to be on the same page. Again, I'll zoom back in to our SPC outlooks. Right now, we do have an enhanced risk, level 3 out of 5, for especially Monday night into Tuesday morning. Enhanced risk there across southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and Alabama into the western Florida Panhandle. Threat for embedded, strong tornadic circulations within the main squall line as it marches off to the east here in this area, as well as a threat for significant damaging winds. 10% tornado risk, 10% hatched tornado risk there in the enhanced risk area, as well as a 30% hatched area for damaging winds, perhaps in excess of 60, 70 miles an hour in that area. Slight risk extends back out to the west into southeast Texas. Again, conditional threat for a strong tornado possibly here in southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana if the surface, the low levels can destabilize adequately enough. Again, that will be if those temperatures at the surface can get up into the low to mid 70s. That will mean storms will be surface-based, and we could see an upgrade here in probabilities across this area. But right now we have a slight risk level 2 out of 5. Places like Houston, Galveston, Beaumont, Lake Charles, under the gun for a level 2 out of 5 slight risk. 5%, 2 and 5% tornado risk there, including the Houston area. Again, the college football playoffs or championship is tomorrow in Houston, so that all you folks in the Houston area will need to look out for severe weather tomorrow afternoon and evening, leading up to and during that game. Tornado threat and damaging wind threat will be the main risks there. Also, chance for a few large hail reports in here, with especially discrete supercells out ahead of the main squall line. But this is going to be a pretty intense event, it looks like. At the very minimum, we should see a very robust squall line making its way off to the east, with the chance for embedded, strongly tornadic circulations and significant damaging wind. Going into Tuesday, and that threat will shift east going into Tuesday, as we saw slight risk for now from Florida and Georgia northeastward into the Carolinas as that threat shifts east. But Monday, we'll have to wait until we see what happens with Monday's event before we can make judgments on Tuesday. So again, very intense event. Again, that squall line looks to be the main threat, and at minimum what we will see. And the potential for discrete supercells out ahead of the main line is also there, especially across this area in the enhanced risk region. So if you live in these areas, definitely keep an eye on things. I'll be back hopefully tomorrow morning and Tuesday morning if needed with additional updates as we get some more data in. But this is what the forecast looks like for now. And definitely keep your eye on the sky tomorrow if you live in these areas. Keep those weather radios handy. Stay tuned to your local National Weather Service office and the Storm Prediction Center for the latest information. And we'll get through this event just fine. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.